Hello everyone, I am Mahboubeh Rakhshandehroo. I studied both of my MA and PhD in education at Osaka University. And in both of my MA and PhD, I researched EMI or English medium instruction. I am currently teaching part-time at Kansai University and I am also one of the webinar coordinators of this network. Today I'm going to share with you a brief literature review of EMI in Japan, and also with a brief overview of also in Asia and in Europe. And this is a presentation that I presented a few days ago at Leyland University, Japan. Okay, let's get started. EMI or English medium instruction is rapidly spreading all around the world, yet there is no universally accepted definition of it. Today, I'm going to refer to MEC's definition, the Ministry of Education of Japan, which refers to teaching academic content courses in English, and it has no language teaching and learning objectives, although, as you know, language learning might happen as a latent benefit. And EMI, also another similar term, which is ETPs, and refers to full degree English taught programs. Both of them refer to the context of countries where English is not the L1 or the first language of the majority, which itself can be a little vague because to what extent we can refer to the language that the majority of a country are speaking can be a little bit difficult, especially in the context of some countries that use a few languages. It can be a little easier in the case of Japan, but not in the case of other countries. In the literature, EMI mostly refers to the content, classes, or courses. For example, Bradford study. But when the whole degree program is being taught in the English medium, as I explained before, it is commonly in the literature referred to as ETPs. There are a couple of similar terms to EMI, but all of them tend to have dual focus on both language and also content. The most common one is CLIL, content and language integrated learning. Also a couple of others, for example, CBI or content-based instruction. And new term, I think developed by Hino 2017, which is CELFIL, Content and English as a Lingua Franca Integrated Learning, as Hino believes that there are different types of Englishes, for example, Japanese English, Iranian English, and other countries' English, and we can have a lot of benefits by using those diversified types of English in our EMI or CLIL classrooms. There are also a lot of different terms with a focus mainly on the language in the literature. For example, EFL, EIL, and EAP or ESP. And nowadays in many more Japanese universities, there is a tendency to start with EAP or ESP before moving on to EMI content classes and also ETPs in order to prepare the domestic students in terms of their linguistic readiness, in terms of their English language ability before moving on to EMI. Nowadays, Englishization of higher education is closely linked with internationalization and globalization. And in the recent studies shows that English-speaking countries, and after that, non-English-speaking countries, for example, in Europe, that most of our EMI and more importantly, full degree ETPs have been the most successful in the internationalization of their higher education institutions, particularly in terms of university output and international rankings. This figure shows the total language shares in academic publications over the past 100 years. And as you can see, English has started to be the dominant language even before the start of the globalization. The first non-English universities that started to offer ETPs full degree English taught programs there in Europe in the 1980s. For example, one of the first one was the University of Maastricht in 1985, and the ETP was at the undergraduate level in international management. The Bologna Declaration in 1999 facilitated this trend and also the student mobility throughout Europe. And it was to an extent that Phillips in 2019 pointed out that in Bologna, internationalization has been defined as English medium instruction, somehow exaggeratedly. And also the Erasmus program, which deals with universities from over 30 countries and in more than 4,000 higher education institutions, also facilitated this trend after this declaration. And ETPs rose very quickly in Europe. More than 800 ETPs were created in Europe by 2002, and by 2008 there were more than 2,400 ETPs in Europe. EMIs increased by 1,000% between 2000 and 2008, mostly at the graduate level. The rationale has been firstly to respond to the needs of domestic students in the rapidly globalizing world, and then this focus shifted towards recruiting the international student and type of marketization of higher education, also to promote the global competitiveness and academic profiles of the higher education institutions. There has been a large research attention to the Europe's context with the rapid expansion of ETPs in Europe, and the focus has been especially on the negative outcomes and challenges. A major challenge has been focused on the American hegemony and English academic imperialism, which can put the position of other languages at risk and raises awareness about the importance of focusing enough and putting enough attention on the role of English and the role of other languages as well. A dominant challenge in the case of Europe has been identified as the linguistic challenges. For instance, the quality of EMI and ETPs due to linguistic limitations of students or faculty members. And a suggestion has been pointed out as a need for collaboration between the instructors and also language staff. Also, a number of different cultural challenges and structural challenges has been identified as well in the case of Europe. And for example, in terms of the cultural challenges, a need for intercultural training for both students and faculty was pointed out in the highly diversified campuses due to the increase of the use of EMI. And in terms of structural challenges, need for developing teaching materials and recruiting English-speaking instructors were pointed out. In Asia, this trend mainly started through a partner relationship with the English-speaking countries, including the US, the UK, and Australia. And then these countries gradually developed their own EMI or ETPs. Also in Asia, the countries that used to be colonized by English-speaking countries, for example, Singapore and Malaysia, these countries adopted the EMI faster than those countries that didn't have this experience, including Japan, Korea, and China. In Asia also, since the 1980s, we can see that starting with the leading universities and then other universities, in Japan, Korea, and China, other ASEAN countries have been increasingly expanding their EMI and ETPs provision. The rationales differs widely, and most of them include the recruitment of international students, also building a better profile for higher education institutions. Also, in the recent years, English has become the working language of different organizations, including WTO, ASEAN, and so on, so that English has become more and more useful in the higher education and in tertiary level. The initiatives in East Asia has been predominantly government-led, and especially South Korea and China and Japan, they have gone through similar rationales and also similar challenges for implementing their EMI and ETPs. The similar rationale has been the competitiveness of their higher education institutions, and a shared challenge is identified as the quality of EMI ETPs, such as linguistic readiness of students and instructors. And as mentioned before, this is similar to Europe's context as well. Also, a lack of research on the actual practices of EMI or ETPs in relation to the government's policy strategies was mentioned. In China, by 2006, an average of 44 EMI courses per university were implemented. And as you know, the number of international students in China is rising very, very quickly, the first one in Asia. And the government, similar to the case of South Korea and Japan, aims to increase the number by target year, which is increase the number to 500,000 by 2020 in the case of China. In South Korea, one difference can be the rise of ETPs compared to EMI in the case of Japan and China. ETPs at approximately 40% of Korean universities were implemented by 2016. And also, we can see the increase in the number of international students from 11,000 in 2001 to 90,000 in 2012. Also here in the South Korea, the government aims to recruit more international students by a set plan. One accident happened in 2006 at a leading Korean university, KAEST, that this university decided to implement university-wide ETPs and suddenly switched the medium of instruction, all of them, to the English. Although some students, dumb skill students, pointed out that they were not ready for this sudden switch of the medium of instruction. And after these, 4 universities committed suicide. While it is difficult to link their suicide commitments to the sudden adoption of ETPs, this has made the university to decide on a need in the ETP's requirement and also degrade penalties, and also raises awareness on the importance of enough preparation, sufficient preparation before switching the medium of instruction. In case of Japan, EMI has started very early on at Tokyo University or Kansai University, the previous name of that, after Meiji Restoration or Meiji Ishin. It was firstly to serve the new Western community that came to Japan due to Japan's modernization. But then after that, the medium of instruction switched to Japanese, because the Japanese students that were sent abroad and the scholars, they all came back to Japan, and then they could take over all the teaching positions. Also, the books and the resources has started to be translated to Japanese. It was by the end of World War II, around 1946, that again EMI has started to be implemented at a few Japanese universities due to US occupation, such as Sophia University and International Christian University, again to serve the new Western community because of the US occupation. It was around the 1960s that EMI started to be implemented by targeting the international students as exchange programs, such as at the University of Waseda. In the 1980s, because of the globalization trend, more EMI and also ETPs started to be implemented. The graduate level ETPs by this time rose to 14 universities. By 1990s, the graduate level ETPs were implemented at 28 universities. And by 2006, EMI was used at approximately 1/3 of Japanese universities. 2009 to 2013, the G30 or Global 30 initiative started to be implemented. And due to this implementation, the number of EMI and ETPs also started to be rising. By 2013, undergraduate level ETPs were implemented at approximately 20 universities. And the two recent project also Go Global Japan and TGU or Top Global University also helped to increase the number of EMI and ATPs in Japanese higher education institutions. This table shows the number of ETPs, full-taught English degree programs in Japanese universities at undergraduate and graduate level. As you can see, they're mostly implementing in the engineering field and mostly at the graduate level. And this table shows the number of EMI and ETPs at the graduate and undergraduate levels from the start of the G30 program 2009 to the recent 2015. And as we can see here, the number of undergraduate EMI is more, and at the graduate level we have more ETPs. In Japan's context, as we discussed, the main target of EMI was firstly the Western community, and then moved to the international student. And there is a recent trend that focuses on the domestic students in order to develop their English language skills, as well as to foster their global rujinzai or global human resources character of the domestic students. As Brown's recent study shows, more EMI courses here in Japan serve Japanese students rather than international students. And this figure shows different rationales for implementing EMI or ETPs in Japanese higher education. In Japanese higher education, in higher education's highly diversified structure, we can see different models. These models, the Dejima model and Crossroad and Global Citizen model, are basically based on Shimauchi's study. The Dejima model is being implemented at a few elite universities that receive most of government's funding. And they use ETPs as a way to attract high-quality international students, especially at graduate level and in STEM subjects. And they seek better places in the rankings. Global Citizen model mainly focuses on the Japanese students and the domestic students. And in order to develop the Japanese students' global citizen character, global resources character. And Crossroad model is a similar model, but focuses on both international students and Japanese students at a few Japanese universities that are mostly private but well-funded. Global Citizen model is being used at most of Japanese universities, mostly private-based. They're mostly small-scale private universities. They use EMI as an elective component of the domestic students' Japanese medium instruction or JMI degree. And EMI implementation is not university-wide, but is through single department or program. And they have mostly marketing approach. A number of different challenges also has been pointed out in the case of Japan. Similar to Europe and Asia, the literature has been mainly focused on the challenges. In terms of cultural challenges, firstly, the lack of cultural integration of international students and the risk of their isolation or Dejimization has been pointed out. Especially at the Dejima model of ETPs, where the main focus of ETPs is international students, and they are relatively segregated and isolated from the mainstream group of students who are Japanese students. Also, the difficulty of integrating EMI into university culture and Japanese students' shyness when speaking English, even if they're fluent in English, has been pointed out. It is suggested that interventions should be made in order to promote the intercultural skills of educators and international students, and to integrate EMI TPs into the university culture. Also, linguistic challenges has been mentioned in the literature, similar to the Asia and Europe's cases. The linguistic limitations, especially speaking and listening skills of some Japanese students and also professors and staff, has been pointed out. Also, relatively few international faculty members was mentioned. And it is suggested that, especially in the case of EMI courses that are targeting domestic students, the usage of L1 of the domestic students can be beneficial. Also, carefully established English language standards are needed for both instructors and students. In terms of cultural challenges, I divided them into two main types: administrative managerial and also institutional, which is based on Bradford 2016 study. As you can see, in the case of Japan, structural challenges has been mentioned a lot in literature. In case of administrative or managerial type, firstly, the internationalization of EMI and ETP's curriculum resulted from diverse reasons, including a dominant ad hoc approach, a marketization approach, and inflexibility in making changes in the Japanese curriculum in the majority of Japanese universities, which are private type. And then non-specialist EMI TP's professors or lecturers who used to be English language instructors, and now they are assigned to teach content-based EMI courses. Also, a lack of full-time EMI specialist administrators and non-established policies regarding EMI TP's English level of professors, also at the governmental and institutional levels, both of them, and the lack of English assessment policies. And finally, a lack of formal and structural support for international students, with the dominance of paternalism support model, means looking after the students like parents. And in terms of institutional challenges, means the ways EMI is integrated into the university. There are also a couple of challenges, such as targeting EMI for marketing purposes with short-term goals without strategic planning, paying too much attention to quantitative targets rather than focusing on the actual integration, a lack of communication between different stakeholders, and a lack of coordination, and the lack of intercultural mindset of some EMI TP's faculty, and the resistance toward the acceptance of them as beneficial strategies were pointed out. And in this slide, I put different categories of the challenges all together so that you can see that the structural challenges are more than linguistic and cultural in the case of Japan. And this is my final slide, some final thoughts about the future research. As we can see, EMI in Japan, also similar to other parts of the world, is increasing very rapidly. And although the number is increasing very rapidly, research on the actual practices is lacking. In the literature, we can see the research focus has been mostly on the challenges here, mostly linguistic, about the quality, and also about the structure of these programs. There is a need to slow down and research the actual practices and the ways for improvement. There is a need for support for students and faculty members, coordination between and among different stakeholders, and also established policies depending on the needs and resources before starting to implement the new ETPs and or EMIs. And here are a list of the main references that I used for this presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Arigatou gozaimashita. And this is my email address. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions or any concerns. Thank you so much again for watching this.